Imagine you're in the midst of a brutal conflict, surrounded by the constant noise of war, explosions, gunfire, the clatter of boots on the ground. Amid this chaos, a strange sound drifts through the air, faint yet unsettling. It's so subtle, so seemingly insignificant, that no one gives it a second thought. But what if that sound, dismissed by so many, was the harbinger of a catastrophe so immense that it would change the course of history? In the summer of 1917, the Battle of Messines was raging on the Western Front of World War I for days. The British forces had been planning and executing a military operation that would forever be etched in the annals of warfare. The terrain was treacherous, and the conditions were nearly unbearable. But it wasn't just the rain or the mud that made this particular battle unique. It was a secret weapon that lay buried deep beneath the surface, an explosive power that would send shockwaves through the battlefield. But there was one thing Juan expected. The soldiers who had been stationed in the area had heard something strange, a faint rumble, an unfamiliar sound. Was it an animal? A shift in the ground? Or perhaps it was just the sound of nature at war with itself? They didn't know, but it was ignored, as things like this often are during such chaos. But little did they know, this sound was not the wind. It was the earth itself groaning under the weight of something far more dangerous. The strange sound that echoed through the battlefield wasn't a mere disturbance. It was the precursor to something much more terrifying. A massive underground explosion that would consume everything in its path, obliterating a hill and all the men stationed on it. This was not just any explosion. It was one that swallowed a hill whole, as though the earth had opened up and devoured it in a single, devastating instant. In this video, we'll delve into the incredible and often forgotten story of the Battle of Messines, focusing on the catastrophic events that took place when the earth itself became a weapon of war. How did this strange sound, ignored by so many, lead to one of the most dramatic explosions in the history of World War I? What does this tell us about the unpredictability of warfare and the terrifying consequences of underestimating seemingly insignificant warnings? Stick with us as we uncover the truth behind the explosion that swallowed an entire hill and explore how this moment changed the face of warfare forever. So, let's go back to that strange sound, one that no one seemed to recognize. What was it really, and how did it lead to the unimaginable destruction that followed? Stay tuned, because the answers will send a shiver down your spine. Before we dive deeper into the mind-blowing details of the explosion and its aftermath, let's take a moment. If you're finding the story of this strange sound and the ensuing catastrophe as gripping as we are, make sure to let us know. Why? Because your support helps us bring more untold stories like this one into the light. The Battle of Messines is often overshadowed by other monumental events of World War I, but its lessons are just as profound. We're diving into the mysteries and the devastating consequences of seemingly small details ignored at the time. We want you to join this journey to understand the true scale of the sacrifices made, the science behind these hidden weapons, and the power of strategy, invention, and disaster. If this is the kind of content you want to see more of, don't forget to hit like, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe to ensure you never miss another deep dive into the explosive moments of history. We want to hear from you. What do you think caused that strange sound? Do you believe that ignoring small signs in a battlefield can lead to disasters? Leave your comment below. Your insights are what make this community truly amazing. Now, Let's move forward and explore the shocking details of what really happened when that mine exploded and how it swallowed an entire hill. It was a quiet, almost eerie anticipation that hung in the air in the days leading up to the explosion. In the months before, British forces had been secretly tunneling beneath the German lines, laying the groundwork for one of the most astonishing acts of destruction the war had ever seen. What the Germans didn't realize, however, was that their fate was already sealed. The earth beneath them was about to become the ultimate weapon. For months, the British engineers worked tirelessly, digging tunnels beneath the ridge of a strategic high ground in the Ypres salient. It was an audacious plan, one that required secrecy and precision. They planted 19 massive mines, which were connected to a series of tunnels built deep below the German lines. These mines were packed with explosives, tons of high-powered explosives, more than enough to devastate entire trenches, obliterate enemy positions, and alter the course of the battle. The British soldiers called it the Big Bang, but at the time, no one could have predicted the true scale of its impact. The mines were set to explode at 3:10 a.m. on June 7, 1917, right before the British launched their attack. The British Army had been planning this moment for years, knowing that capturing the Ridge of Masons would give them a crucial tactical advantage. But to do so, they needed to shake the very foundation of the battlefield itself. And so they turned to the earth beneath their feet. In the early hours of June 7th, as the British troops prepared for their assault, something strange happened. A faint rumble echoed through the air. It wasn't the sound of artillery fire or the rumble of war. It was something different. The ground seemed to groan, as if it were alive, preparing for something far more catastrophic. But for the men in the trenches, the sound was dismissed as nothing more than another noise in the cacophony of war. Little did they know it was the prelude to the explosion that would change everything. At 3:10 a.m., the sound that had been heard moments before was followed by a deafening roar. The earth trembled as the first of the 19 mines detonated beneath the German lines. The explosion was so powerful, so forceful, that it could be heard miles away. It was as if the very ground had opened up, swallowing everything in its path. Entire sections of the ridge collapsed, sending shockwaves of dust and debris into the air. The blast was so violent that it created a massive crater, a chasm that would forever be etched into the landscape of the battlefield. The force of the explosion was unlike anything the soldiers had ever experienced. It wasn't just an ordinary blast. It was a geological event, one that swallowed entire hills and disrupted the very fabric of the ground. The Germans, who had no idea of the scale of the operation below them, were caught completely off guard. It was a disaster they couldn't have predicted, an event so shocking that it left them in stunned disbelief. The ground had betrayed them. The British forces, poised and ready for their assault, took full advantage of the devastation caused by the explosions. The German defenses were in disarray, their positions rendered useless. The mine explosions had torn through their lines, leaving a vast, gaping wound in their defenses. British troops surged forward, capitalizing on the chaos, and within hours, the Ridge of Messines was in British hands. But while the success of the British attack was undeniable, the true story lay in the destruction caused by those 19 mines. The explosion wasn't just an act of war. It was a demonstration of the hidden power that lay beneath the earth, a power that could change the course of battle with a single, deafening roar. What had started as a strange, almost imperceptible sound was now the catalyst for one of the most remarkable moments in military history. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled, the full scale of the destruction was revealed. Entire hills had been swallowed up by the earth, craters as deep as they were wide, marking the landscape forever. The German troops, disoriented and in shock, couldn't believe what had just happened. The power of the mine explosions had completely shattered their defenses, turning the once impregnable position into a charred and broken wasteland. As the dust settled over the cratered battlefield of Messines, a chilling realization began to spread among the survivors. The war had just entered a new phase. It was no longer just about bullets, bayonets, and brutal combat. The soldiers who had been stationed on that hill, both British and German, now faced a terrifying new form of warfare: the weaponization of the earth itself. For the British soldiers, the success of the mine explosions was both a triumph and a source of deep unease. They had broken through the German lines, taken the high ground, and pushed forward with relentless determination. But the true cost of the victory was not immediately apparent. The soldiers who had stood at the epicenter of the explosions described the terrifying moments when the ground seemed to buckle beneath them. They spoke of the eerie sounds that preceded the massive detonation, a sound that none could fully comprehend until it was too late. The mines had been an unprecedented weapon, one that struck at the very foundation of the battlefield. While artillery and machine guns had always been tools of destruction, the mines were something different. They attacked from below, making the very ground beneath the soldiers' feet a potential danger. There was no way to anticipate when the next explosion would come or where it would strike. It was the ultimate example of the unpredictable nature of war. For the German soldiers, the psychological toll was even greater. The mines had come without warning, and the devastating explosions had torn through their positions, leaving them disoriented and confused. Many of the men who had been stationed in the area had no idea what had caused the violent upheaval. Some soldiers, upon hearing the strange rumble in the distance, assumed it was just another artillery barrage. They couldn't have known that beneath their feet the earth was being transformed into a weapon of unimaginable destruction. The mine explosions at Messines shattered the German forces' sense of security. For them, war had always been about facing the enemy in open combat, whether in the trenches or across no man's land. But now, the battlefield was no longer just a visible space filled with soldiers and weapons. It was a place where the very earth could turn against them, swallowing them whole without warning. The fear of the unseen, the fear that something could be waiting beneath the ground, just out of sight, waiting to explode, began to haunt the German soldiers. They had to fight not just against the British forces in front of them, but against the constant, lingering dread of what might lie beneath their feet. The psychological impact of this new form of warfare would resonate long after the battle was over. The British, too, faced their own psychological challenges. While the explosion had achieved a strategic victory, the soldiers were left to grapple with the implications of the technology they had used. The mines, with their terrifying power, had completely altered the nature of the conflict. No longer was the war confined to visible battle lines and direct combat. Now the soldiers had to contend with a new fear, the fear of being buried alive, of having the earth beneath them betray them at any moment. The explosive power of the mines had created an atmosphere of paranoia that would haunt both sides for the remainder of the war. As the battle for Messines raged on, it became clear that the true cost of the explosion wasn't just in the lives lost or the land gained. It was in the fear and uncertainty that spread like a virus, infecting both the British and the German forces. The sound of the earth groaning before the explosion was no longer just a distant rumble. It had become a symbol of the devastating power that lay hidden beneath the surface, ready to erupt At any moment, when the dust finally settled over the remains of Messines Ridge, it was not only the landscape that had been irrevocably changed, but the very nature of warfare itself. The mind-bending destruction caused by the 19 mines had marked a definitive turning point, not just for the British and German forces, but for the future of military strategy. The battlefield had been reshaped by the power hidden beneath the earth, forever altering how wars would be fought in the years to come. The British forces had achieved a stunning victory. They had shattered the German defenses with a single, devastating blow, making use of a weapon that was entirely new to them. A weapon that until that moment had seemed almost too fantastical to be real. The success of the mine explosions at Messines proved that innovation could take many forms, even ones that were buried deep beneath the surface. It was an unorthodox strategy that had caught the enemy off guard, rendering traditional methods of defense obsolete. The surprise and shock caused by the explosions had left the Germans disoriented, unable to react in time to the British assault. But while the British celebrated their victory, the true cost of the operation began to emerge. The terrain was now so scarred and littered with debris that advancing through the area became nearly impossible. The explosions had created such vast craters that they tore apart the landscape, creating an environment where soldiers could no longer move freely. It was a victory, yes, but one that came at a price. The aftermath of the explosion was not just about the loss of life. It was about the irreversible change to the land, a land that would bear the scars of the battle for decades to come. On the German side, the aftermath of Messines was devastating, not only because of the loss of life, but because of the loss of confidence. The explosion had proven to them that no defense was truly safe, no line was invulnerable. The Germans had long relied on their stronghold positions in the trenches and bunkers, believing that they were safe from any sort of underground attack. The mines, however, had completely shattered this perception. They had proven that the very ground beneath their feet could betray them in an instant. The psychological toll on the German troops was immense. Many soldiers were left unable to trust the ground they walked on. They had come to fear the silence, to fear the quiet before the storm. The fear of mines, the fear of the earth itself becoming a weapon, made every step a dangerous gamble. No one could predict where the next explosion might come from, and that uncertainty, nor that the German soldiers, undermining their morale and leaving them vulnerable to further attacks. For the British, Messines marked a triumph, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of modern warfare. The mine explosions had caused unparalleled destruction, but at what cost? The explosion was a reminder that technology and innovation, while powerful, could have terrifying consequences. The success of the operation demonstrated the potential for new forms of warfare, but it also revealed the danger of pushing the boundaries of military tactics to their limits. The weapons that had been used at Messines, though innovative, would leave an indelible mark on the soldiers who had fought there, both mentally and physically. As the battle subsided and both sides regrouped, the importance of Messines in the broader context of World War I became clear. It had not only altered the course of the conflict, but had set the stage for the type of warfare that would dominate the 20th century. The explosion at Messines was a precursor to future conflicts, where the lines between traditional battle tactics and technological advancements would continue to blur. It was a defining moment, one that demonstrated the immense power of innovation and the consequences of underestimating the smallest of sounds. As the war progressed, the Battle of Messines would become a touchstone for future military operations. The success of the mines and the shock it sent through both the British and German forces sparked a shift in how warfare was approached on all fronts. Messines showed the world that innovation was not just about creating new weapons, but about changing the very way battles were fought. It demonstrated that a single, unexpected tactic could change the tide of war, leaving those who underestimated it vulnerable. The most significant legacy of the Battle of Messines was the understanding of underground warfare. Although mines had been used in various forms for centuries, the scale and sophistication of the operation at Messines were groundbreaking. The British had used tunnels and explosives in a way that was both strategic and highly effective. They had not only used the power of the mine to inflict damage, but had also exploited the element of surprise to create a psychological advantage over their enemies. The success of the mine explosions at Messines helped to cement the idea of total war, a conflict where every aspect of life, from the land to the people, could be weaponized. The concept of using the earth itself as a weapon would resonate throughout the remainder of the war and beyond. In the years that followed, new forms of warfare would emerge that sought to incorporate every possible advantage, from the air to the sea, from the skies to the underground. But the true legacy of Messines wasn't just in the physical destruction it caused, it was in the way it reshaped military thinking. The ability to strike from beneath, to use hidden weapons that operated outside the traditional bounds of warfare, forced military leaders to rethink the rules. They had to ask themselves what other secret weapons might be hidden in the terrain, what other unexpected threats could come from beneath the surface. The mine explosion at Messines highlighted a new reality for soldiers on the front lines. There was no longer any place that was safe. The boundaries between the visible and the invisible, between the seen and the unseen, had blurred. This realization forever changed the psychology of soldiers, both in the First World War and in future conflicts. The fear of what lay below the surface became ingrained in the very fabric of combat, altering the way soldiers approached every step of their journey. Beyond its immediate tactical and psychological impact, Messines also played a role in shaping future technological developments. The success of the mine explosions encouraged further research into underground warfare, leading to the development of more sophisticated tunneling and mining techniques in subsequent wars. These methods would become crucial during World War II, particularly in the development of new technologies for breaching enemy lines and causing disruption behind enemy lines. Messines had set the stage for the future of warfare, where surprise and technological innovation were just as important as brute force. While the military significance of the Messines explosion reverberated through history, the human and environmental cost left an indelible mark on the region for years to come. The explosion, which had sent shockwaves through the battlefield and dramatically altered the landscape, was a double-edged sword. The devastating consequences of such an innovative weapon were not just seen in the immediate aftermath, but also in the lingering environmental scars and the toll it took on both the soldiers who fought in that brutal conflict and the civilian populations who would never see their land the same way again. The physical landscape of Messines Ridge, once a tactical stronghold, was forever altered. The earth that had once held trenches, fortifications, and fields now lay scattered with massive craters, some large enough to swallow whole sections of the hill. These vast holes in the ground, remnants of the explosive charges buried beneath the surface, were now a haunting reminder of the scale of destruction unleashed that fateful day. The debris was scattered far and wide, and what had once been a battlefield littered with the remains of the fallen was now a scarred, fractured environment that would take decades to heal. Beyond the immediate devastation, the ecological impact was profound. Forests that once covered the ridges were reduced to splintered, smoldering remnants. Flora and fauna that had thrived in the region were obliterated in the blast, leaving the area barren and inhospitable. The land was poisoned by the very explosives meant to tear apart the enemy, leaving behind an unhealable wound in the natural world. The damage to the environment, much like the human casualties, would take years, if not generations, to fully comprehend. But it wasn't just the environment that bore the brunt of Messine's devastation. The soldiers who fought and survived in the aftermath of the explosion carried the scars of the battle with them for the rest of their lives. The psychological toll of the event was immeasurable. For those who had witnessed the explosion firsthand, or who had been involved in the subsequent assault, the experience was not easily forgotten. The suddenness of the explosion, the power of the earth itself becoming a weapon, left soldiers haunted by the ever-present fear of what might be hidden beneath their feet, the fear of underground mines and traps. A reality in many theaters of war became a pervasive mental burden that soldiers could not easily shake. The survivors of the battle, both British and German, found themselves grappling with a new kind of warfare, one that attacked not just their bodies, but their minds. The brutal efficiency of the explosion had destroyed lives in a single moment, leaving no time to react or to fight back. It was a reminder that, in warfare, even the most prepared can be caught unawares. The soldiers who had been there understood that warfare was no longer just about facing the enemy across the battlefield. It was about surviving the unseen, the unpredictable, the unknown. For the civilians who lived in the surrounding areas, the scars of Messians were equally profound. The explosion's shockwaves had reverberated far beyond the military lines, affecting the villages and farms that once dotted the landscape. Many civilians had been evacuated, but some were caught in the wake of the devastation. They too were left to grapple with the psychological and physical consequences of the explosion, as well as the uncertainty of what the future would hold. Many of the displaced would never return to their homes, as the land had been rendered uninhabitable by the aftermath of the explosion. In the years that followed, Messines became more than just a historical footnote. It became a symbol of the destructive power of warfare, one that reminded the world of the delicate balance between innovation and devastation. The explosive power that had once been hailed as a military triumph now stood as a testament to the irreversible toll that war takes on both people and the environment. The battlefields of World War I were littered with similar stories, tales of technological triumphs that, in the end, only served to magnify the human suffering that war brings. The Battle of Messines and its shocking aftermath marked a watershed moment in military strategy. It wasn't just the victories that changed things, but the way in which the victories was achieved through a strategy that relied on innovation, deception, and a willingness to challenge conventional warfare tactics. The use of mines as a devastating surprise weapon beneath the surface would go on to influence the course of future conflicts, altering how battles were planned and fought. Before Messines, warfare was predominantly fought through direct engagement. Soldiers fought face across no man's land, with clear lines of offense and defense. The idea of using underground forces, of employing the earth itself as a weapon, was a relatively underused tactic. Mines had been used in warfare before, but the scale and execution of the Messines operation was unprecedented. The success of the mine explosions at Messines set a new precedent in military thinking. Surprise and ingenuity could be just as powerful, if not more so, than brute force and firepower. The psychological effect on both the British and German armies was immediate. The Germans, who had once relied on entrenched defensive positions, were caught off guard by the devastation that came from below. In many ways, the success of the mines shattered the conventional understanding of battlefield tactics. How could one defend against an enemy that could strike from below? How could traditional strategies hold up against such an unpredictable force of nature? On the British side, the success of Messines led to a shift in military thinking as well. It was a demonstration that unconventional tactics, when executed correctly, could yield incredible results. Military leaders realized that there was a whole new dimension to the battlefield that needed to be explored. The use of mines and other forms of underground warfare would become a cornerstone of future military strategies, particularly in later conflicts like World War II, where innovations in weapons and tactics would continue to evolve. But Messines also revealed the dangers of relying too heavily on new and untested tactics. While the mine explosions achieved an incredible strategic victory, they also demonstrated the destructive potential of technological innovation. The damage caused by the explosion was not just a victory for the British, it was a wake-up call to the destructive forces that could be unleashed when science and technology were pushed to their limits. The horror of Messines served as a reminder that innovation in warfare comes with a heavy cost, one that must be carefully weighed against the potential benefits. In the years that followed, military strategists around the world began to explore the potential of underground warfare more seriously. The success of Messines set a precedent for future operations that used hidden forces and surprise tactics to achieve victory. The British and their allies, having seen firsthand the power of the mines, began to incorporate this type of strategy into their future operations, particularly in areas where trench warfare remained dominant. The legacy of Messines would continue to reverberate across military planning, with similar operations carried out during World War II, where mines, tunnels, and explosives played a central role in operations like the Battle of El Alamein and the D-Day invasion. In the aftermath of the Battle of Messines, the world slowly began to absorb the true consequences of the events that had unfolded. Messines was not just a battle won, but a sobering reminder of the destructive power that innovation could unleash. The mine explosions, which had altered the course of the war, also marked the beginning of a new era in military strategy. The lessons learned from the devastation at Messines shaped the future of warfare, leaving an indelible mark on military thought and action. One of the most immediate impacts of Messines was the shift in how military leaders perceived the battlefield. The mine explosions had proven that the earth itself could be weaponized. Tunnels, subterranean warfare, and hidden explosives became essential elements in future military planning. The psychological effects on both the British and German forces were profound. The Germans, in particular, were faced with a terrifying new reality. Their defenses, which had once been considered impenetrable, were now vulnerable to hidden threats below the surface. The British, too, found themselves grappling with the implications of their success. While their victory at Messines was hard-earned and strategically important, the scale of destruction caused by the mines left them questioning the ethics of such weapons. As the war continued, the success of Messines prompted further experimentation with underground warfare, and the lessons learned were applied to future battles. The use of mines as a strategic weapon was not confined to World War I alone. In World War II, mines played a crucial role in both defensive and offensive operations, from the use of landmines to the strategic placement of explosive charges in enemy territories. The legacy of Messines loomed large over military tactics. The impact of that single explosion echoed throughout the decades, influencing military doctrines and shaping the way wars were fought. But while the legacy of Messines was significant, It also highlighted the ethical dilemmas that arise when new technologies are introduced into warfare. The success of the mines, while devastating to the enemy, also raised questions about the limits of acceptable warfare. How far could military innovation go before it crossed the line into inhumane tactics? The fear of underground mines and other forms of hidden warfare would linger long after the battle ended. Soldiers would be haunted by the sounds of the earth itself, forever wary of the invisible dangers lurking beneath their feet. In the broader scope of military history, messianics became a symbol of the relentless march of technological progress in warfare. It was a reminder that every innovation, no matter how effective, came with a price. The mines, which had proven so successful at Messines, were a double-edged sword. They were a weapon that changed the course of history, but also a weapon that left the world with deep moral questions about the nature of warfare. As the final echoes of the explosions at Messines faded into history, the world was left to ponder the cost of such a devastating victory. The story of the mines, the strange sound that preceded the explosion, and the subsequent shockwave that swallowed an entire hill serves as a stark reminder of the unpredictable and brutal nature of warfare. It was a victory, yes, but one that carried with it a deep sense of unease and reflection. The question remains, was this an example of brilliant military strategy, or was it a moment where the horrors of innovation crossed a moral line? The battle itself, the aftermath, and the way it changed the landscape of war are often remembered in military circles as a textbook example of how a seemingly small tactical shift can reshape the entire course of a conflict. The explosion at Messines set the stage for future advancements in military technology and strategy. Yet, it also underscored the terrifying truth that war, in its most extreme forms, can be fought in ways that were previously unimaginable, from the earth beneath our feet to the skies above. The true legacy of Messines isn't just the physical scars left on the land, it's the way it reshaped military tactics, the psyche of the soldiers, and the future of warfare itself. It a lesson in the cost of underestimating the unpredictable nature of war and the dangers of new, untested methods. The echoes of that strange sound will always linger in the history of warfare, a reminder that the next innovation, no matter how small it seems, could change everything. As you reflect on this story, consider the profound lessons it offers. The impact of Messines isn't limited to the soldiers who fought and died there. It extends to every conflict that followed. The consequences of innovation, the psychological toll on soldiers, and the ethical questions raised by the use of such weapons are questions that continue to haunt military strategists today. And as new technologies continue to emerge on the modern battlefield, the lessons of Messines serve as a powerful reminder of the unpredictability and the cost of warfare. If you've made it to the end of this video, you've just taken part in uncovering one of the most mind-boggling moments in military history. Now, it's your turn to join the conversation. If this story left you thinking about the role of innovation in war and the devastating consequences of seemingly small decisions, let us know what you think in the comments. Was the explosion at Messines an act of brilliance, or did it reveal a deeper moral question about the limits of warfare? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to like this video if you found this story fascinating. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the most surprising and impactful moments of history. For those of you who stuck with us until the end, your support means the world to us. Now, go ahead and click on the next video to continue exploring untold stories from the past that changed the world. See you in the next one.